Welcome to Hearts Remembered, where forgotten voices find their song again. Today's story will remind you that music doesn't just entertain, it heals, it connects, and sometimes it brings back what we thought was lost forever. Stay until the end, because what happens in the final moments will leave you in tears. Margaret Sullivan had been a music teacher for 38 years before Alzheimer's disease began stealing her memories piece by piece. For nearly 4 decades, she had taught guitar and voice to hundreds of students at Lincoln Elementary School in Portland, Oregon. Her classroom had been filled with the sound of children learning scales, practicing chords, discovering that they could create something beautiful with their own hands. She had been the kind of teacher students remembered decades later, the one who stayed after school to help a struggling child finally master a difficult chord progression, the one who believed every student had music inside them, even if they couldn't hear it yet, the one who played her vintage acoustic guitar with such joy that it made even the shyest children want to sing along. But now, at 74 years old, Margaret sat in a wheelchair in the common room of Riverside Care Center, her guitar gathering dust in the corner of her small room. Most days, she didn't remember having been a teacher. She didn't remember the hundreds of students whose lives she had touched. Some days, she didn't even remember her own daughter's name. Her daughter Claire visited every Sunday without fail, though each visit broke her heart a little more. She would sit beside her mother, holding her hand, talking about memories that Margaret could no longer access. Claire would show her old photographs, Margaret conducting a school concert, Margaret receiving a teaching award, Margaret laughing with students, and her mother would look at them as if seeing a stranger's life. The guitar had been Claire's idea. 6 months ago, she had brought her mother's beloved instrument from the house Margaret could no longer live in, hoping it might trigger some spark of recognition. But Margaret had looked at the guitar blankly, as if she had never seen it before. It had sat untouched ever since, a painful reminder of everything the disease had taken. Riverside Care Center was a kind place, but it was still filled with the quiet sadness that comes with watching people slowly disappear from themselves. Residents sat in the common areas, some watching television they didn't follow, others sleeping in their chairs, a few having conversations that looped back to the beginning every few minutes. The staff did their best to bring joy, activities, games, movie nights, but there was an underlying heaviness that couldn't quite be lifted. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon in November, everything changed. A volunteer coordinator named David Chen had organized a small autumn celebration in the common room. Nothing elaborate, some fall decorations, apple cider, cookies shaped like leaves. About 20 residents gathered, attended by nurses and a handful of family members who happened to be visiting. David had brought his own guitar, planning to play a few classic songs to brighten the afternoon. He was a decent player, enthusiastic, if not particularly skilled. He set up a small folding chair at the front of the room and began with "You Are My Sunshine," strumming simple chords, his voice pleasant but unremarkable. Margaret sat in her wheelchair near the back of the room, her expression vacant, neither engaged nor distressed. Claire sat beside her, gently holding her mother's hand, not expecting anything different than any other day. But then David made a mistake. He was trying to transition to "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" when his finger slipped, producing a discordant sound that made him stop and laugh self-consciously. "Sorry, folks," he said with a grin. "I'm still learning that one. These chord changes are trickier than they look." That's when it happened. From the back of the room came a voice, quiet but clear. "You're trying to go from a G major to an E minor. Move your middle finger first, then the others follow." Every head turned. It was Margaret. Her eyes, which had been unfocused moments before, were now alert, watching David's hands on the guitar. Claire's breath caught in her throat. Her mother hadn't spoken a complete, coherent sentence in weeks. David looked surprised but encouraged. "You play guitar?" he asked gently. Margaret's brow furrowed as if trying to remember something just out of reach. I think I do. I think I did. Claire stood up, her heart pounding. Mom, your guitar's in your room. Would you like me to get it? For a long moment, Margaret didn't respond. Then slowly, she nodded. Claire practically ran down the hallway. When she returned carrying the worn acoustic guitar, Margaret's eyes followed the instrument with something that looked like recognition. Claire carefully placed it in her mother's lap. Margaret's hands, gnarled with arthritis and trembling slightly, touched the strings. Her fingers found the fretboard almost automatically, muscle memory deeper than conscious thought. She strummed once, tentatively. The guitar was out of tune. Without speaking, she began adjusting the tuning pegs, her ear still able to hear what was wrong, her hands still knowing how to fix it. The room had gone completely silent. The nurses had stopped their rounds. Other residents had turned their attention toward this woman they'd known only as confused and withdrawn. Claire stood frozen, tears already streaming down her face. When the guitar was tuned, Margaret paused. Her fingers hovered over the strings. Then softly she began to play, not "You Are My Sunshine" or "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." She played something far more beautiful, a classical piece, intricate and complex, her fingers moving across the fretboard with unexpected grace, despite their stiffness. It was Romance Anonimo, a Spanish guitar piece known for its delicate beauty and technical difficulty. Margaret's fingers picked out the melody with precision, the notes cascading like water over stones. Her eyes closed as she played, and for the first time in months, her face showed peace instead of confusion. But then something even more remarkable happened. As she played, Margaret began to sing. Not in English, but in Spanish, a language she had studied in college 50 years ago, a language she had never mentioned during her teaching career. The lyrics spoke of love and memory, of time passing like river water, of holding on to beauty even as it slips away. Her voice was thin and wavering with age, but it carried the melody with touching sincerity. The room was transfixed. David sat motionless, his own guitar forgotten in his lap. Several residents were openly crying, though they might not fully understand why. The nurses stood with their hands over their mouths, watching something they had never seen before in their years of working with Alzheimer's patients. When Margaret played the final note, her hands stilled on the strings. For several heartbeats, no one moved. Then Claire knelt beside her mother's wheelchair, taking both of Margaret's hands in hers. "Mom," she whispered, "that was beautiful. That was so beautiful." Margaret looked at her daughter with eyes that seemed, for a moment, to see everything clearly. Did I teach you that song?" Claire shook her head, unable to speak through her tears. "No, Mom, but you taught hundreds of other songs to hundreds of other children. You were a music teacher, the best music teacher." Margaret's clarity began to fade almost immediately, the fog returning to her eyes. But she looked down at the guitar in her lap with something like affection. "This is a good guitar," she said softly. "Someone must have loved it very much." "You did, Mom," Claire said. "You loved it very much." The moment passed. Within minutes, Margaret's awareness receded back into the confusion that had become her normal state. She couldn't explain how she had played that piece or where the Spanish lyrics had come from. By dinner time, she wouldn't remember having played at all. But something fundamental had shifted. From that day forward, the staff made sure Margaret had access to her guitar every day. And while she didn't play every time, and while her lucid moments remained rare and unpredictable, there were afternoons when her fingers would find the strings and something beautiful would emerge from the fog. More importantly, the other residents and staff began to see Margaret differently. She wasn't just a patient with late-stage Alzheimer's. She was a musician, a teacher, a woman who had spent a lifetime filling the world with music. That afternoon had revealed a truth that the disease couldn't completely erase. The deepest parts of who we are live in places that memory loss can't always reach. Claire started bringing old photographs and posting them in her mother's room. Pictures of Margaret with her students, Margaret performing at school concerts, Margaret receiving her retirement award. Even when Margaret couldn't remember the moments captured in those images, they served as testimony. They said, "This is who you were. This is who you still are," somewhere beneath the confusion. The video that David recorded on his phone that day, he'd been filming the autumn celebration casually, was posted to the nursing home's private Facebook page. But Claire asked permission to share it more widely, hoping it might help other families dealing with Alzheimer's. Within days, the video had been viewed millions of times. Comments poured in from people around the world. Former students of Margaret's found the video and shared their own memories. "Mrs. Sullivan taught me guitar in 3rd grade. I still play because of her. She believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. She was the best teacher I ever had." But more than that, the video became a beacon of hope for families watching their loved ones disappear into dementia. It reminded them that the person they knew was still in there somewhere, that music, art and love could sometimes pierce through the fog, even if just for moments. 6 months after that November afternoon, Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep. At her memorial service, Claire set up her mother's guitar at the front of the room. She told the story of that remarkable day when music brought her mother back, even if only briefly. Then she invited anyone who wanted to share a memory or play a song in Margaret's honor to come forward. For 2 hours, former students lined up. Some could barely play anymore, their skills rusty from decades of neglect. Others had become accomplished musicians themselves. Each one played something Margaret had taught them, and each one told a story of how this woman had changed their life. The last person to play was David Chen, the volunteer who had been there that day. He had been practicing for months. He played Romance Anonimo, the piece Margaret had played that afternoon. His version wasn't as beautiful as hers had been. He was still learning, still making mistakes, but he played it with love. And that was what Margaret had always taught, that music without love was just noise, but music with love could heal the world. As the final notes faded, Claire looked at her mother's guitar and smiled through her tears. Alzheimer's had taken so much, memories, recognition, time, but it hadn't taken this. It hadn't taken the music. And because music lives forever in the people it touches, Margaret Sullivan would never truly be gone. This is Hearts Remembered, where we learn that the truest parts of who we are can't be erased by disease or time. Because a life devoted to teaching, to music, to love, creates ripples that spread far beyond what any individual can measure. And sometimes, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, those ripples come back as waves, reminding us of what matters most.